Unsung Murder Ballads discusses topics of a disturbing nature.
And we're not going to hold back on the graphic details and disturbing content.
So we do not recommend our podcast for children under the age of 13.
And while we respect the victims and their families involved in these tragic cases,
we're also going to be critical of mistakes that are made during the investigations.
And we're going to use dark humor to express ourselves now and then.
So with that said, this podcast may not be for everyone.
And that's okay. We're glad you're here checking us out.
And if you've made it this far, welcome to the Unsung Murder Ballads family. And follow us on Instagram at Unsung Murder Ballads if you want to talk to us.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Unsung Murder Ballads. This is episode 103. I am Janice Dead.
I'm Jameson Dead.
And I'm Joyous Dead.
All right, so we are back for part 3 of our Steven Avery case.
Part 3.
So much
we're really,
to
the
all
plot
of
is
it.
as thick as it comes.
Yes, and you know, it's funny because I was rereading my notes for part 3, and I saved most of this part for Brandon Dassey, who is the basically reason everything finally got resolved, right? And we're going to talk about that as we go. And I realized that, like, he's portrayed, I don't know how to explain it. There's a part where he was clearly manipulated by police, but then at the same time, he still is guilty of what he did do. And therefore, you got to remember that too.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave him this part because kind of like we did. The first one focused on Steven Avery, the second one on Teresa Hallback, and this one on Brandon Dassey, kind of. Let's dive. Oh, before we dive back in, someone posted a thing or responded to us on, I don't know if it was Instagram or one of the things, asking about where they can write to appeal to the New Zealand courts to keep the killers of Nia Glassey in prison because their paroles are up at the end of this year.
Holy crap, they are?
Yes.
That's fucking nuts.
However, and this is why I'm saying this now, is I went and looked it up, and I don't know if something happened while they were in there, but they are not eligible for parole as of right now.
Fuck yeah. That's what I like to hear.
Yes. So thankfully, we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to send in letters. But it was a thing when I looked it up, I was like, kind of like, oh shit, are we too late? But no, they're not eligible for parole for some reason. So fuck them. They can rot.
Well, thank you, listener, for bringing that up. Bring that to our attention so we can, if we needed to, then we can mobilize.
Absolutely. And I went in and I looked up. It made me go back and look at all of our early cases to make sure there weren't some updates on some of those. And right now there aren't any, other than Molly Bish's sister, Heather Bish, has moved forward with the state of Massachusetts to start using genetic genealogy on the DNA that was found. So there's potential possible movement going forward on maybe identifying Molly's killer. But again, we've heard that before, so we'll see what happens.
Right.
Man, if something breaks in that'll be huge.
That would be amazing just to have an answer. There was so many potentials that it would be nice to actually have, even if the person's already dead, just to have a name to it.
Right. There's peace in that.
Right. And I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but the trial of the Delphi murder has finally concluded.
Oh, no. I didn't hear that.
So, all right, then don't look up too much. I'm going to do that soon-ish. I know how we try to do things as quickly as we can, but we're going to do that soonish. The sentencing isn't until December, so we'll probably do it in January. But
gotcha.
But this was huge, and I'm not surprised you didn't know it.
Rude, but also correct.
Yeah, it's true. But, I mean, it came back into the spotlight about 6 months ago when they identified a potential suspect, and now the trial's over, and they were found guilty. Spoiler.
Spoiler.
But
yeah.
But it's good to have that wrapped up. So, but we'll go into that soon.
Indeed.
Okay, so here we go. I suppose we should do a quick recap of parts 1 and part 2. So we've already covered the early life of Steven Avery, the things he did while in prison for his wrongful conviction, the things he did after his release that Making a Murderer didn't tell us about. We've also discussed the life of Teresa Hallback and why she was on the Avery property on Halloween that year. We talked about some of the things that happened after that, where Steven's behavior, the police finding bone fragments in his burn pit, as well as larger pieces in a burned barrel, as well as electronics that she owned, like her camera and her cell phone, that Making a Murderer didn't report on. And we talked about some of the forensics involved around that. So that I think that brings us right up to where we are.
Right.
I think. Okay. So we're going to dig into some more things that they found at the crime scenes or, on the Avery property. And then we're going to talk very heavily about Brandon Dassey's confession and then everything moving forward.
All right, let's rock.
So after pieces of human bones and teeth were found on Avery's property, the case became a homicide investigation rather than a missing person case. So on November 8th of 2005, they searched Avery's trailer again, as Agent Fossbender thought they needed to do a more thorough search. Now, keep in mind, they've been through there once or twice, but it was not looking for evidence of a murder.
Right, they were just looking for a missing person.
Exactly. It's during this time that they found the key to Teresa's RAV4 vehicle in Steven Avery's bedroom.
He's an idiot.
Well, here's the weird part. Because the key was laying in plain sight when they found it.
Huh.
Like, it's literally, you can see the photos. There's a nightstand, and on the floor is the key, just out in the open. So, obviously, truthers, they don't accept that it had been there the entire time and that nobody had seen it. And Making a Murderer presents it that way. They're just leaving it there for you to think the police had planted it. But
right, because everything's planted.
Everything's planted at this point. That's what his defense went with, and that's what Making a Murderer went with. So again, we talked about how the first searches were very cursory.
It's just like such a convenient way to get out of any crime. Oh no, it was all planted. Yeah. The dead body was actually planted in my basement. No, it was all planted. I swear to God.
Exactly. And again, we go back to, if you were going to try to frame him for murder, why would you go through such extent with bone fragments?
It's weird.
Right. So, and if you were going to plant this key as a police officer, would you really just toss it on the floor and wait for someone to find it?
Maybe, because, we've discussed how competent police are, even when they're doing their best job sometimes.
That's true. But
I guess I'm the devil's advocate in this case.
Well, that's okay, because we're going to discuss what Convicting a Murderer told us about that Making a Murderer left out. So the biggest difference in the last search was that this time Sergeant Colburn had tipped and kind of twisted the nightstand next to Avery's bed away from the wall as he searched it. He also pulled open a drawer and closed it again. So it's possible that the key was in the back of the drawer, and as things were shifted, it may have been forced out the back end of it and fallen to the floor. Or it may have just been on something like in the back of a shelf, and then when it was twisted, just fell out next to the nightstand.
Sure.
Right. I mean, it's more plausible than them missing a key in the wide open 2 other times.
Right, which is kind of weird.
So, Making a Murderer presents the whole thing as Lank and Colburn having planted the key, but I think it's far more likely that it was hidden behind or, under the nightstand and kind of got moved. That's my take on it. At this point, when they found the key, even the prosecution knew the moment they found it that their job just became more difficult. Because of the circumstances, they now have to explain how they found it, why it seems so obvious, and why it very easily looks like it could have been planted.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, it really sucks for them.
Badly obtained evidence can look really bad, yeah.
Right, and this is why now they have body cams.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the only reason, but...
Yeah, one of many reasons.
So on November 9th, Steven Avery was interrogated by police, and obviously he denies any involvement. However, Steven Avery's DNA was found on the key.
Well...
Now, his blood was also found inside Teresa's vehicle.
His blood?
His blood. So we're going to discuss, when we get to Brandon Dassey's confession, we're going to discuss what they did to Teresa. But for now, understand that Steven Avery had a cut on his hand.
Okay.
So he went into the vehicle. So this is the theory, because there's right near the key where you turn the key, there's a weirdly shaped blood smear. Okay. And to describe the shape without you actually seeing it, it kind of looks like, how like when a kid is painting a scene, like a scenery, like a beach, and they paint birds in the sky, and it's like this kind of loopy, like a double loop.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It sort of looks like that.
Interesting.
One is really short and the other one is this big long loop, like a big arc. So it's clear when you look at it and you're thinking about how would you put a key in here and then turn the key. It's kind of obvious that this is the shape of the blood smear.
That makes sense.
Right. So when you think about that, because like in Making a Murderer, they talk about it's such a weird arrangement of blood, like how whatever. It looks like someone just took a Q-tip and smeared blood there. You know what I mean? And you're like, no, it looks like someone started the fucking car, right?
Right.
The problem is, even with all that information, none of this stops people from believing that Avery's blood was actually put there. Now, the big thing is, how would his blood get put there? Steven Avery tries to come forward in Making a Murderer saying that he had cut himself and there was blood left over in his sink and they must have gotten it from there. But imagine now that you would have to know he cut himself, have already stashed the car somewhere, somehow got in there before the blood dried, and
right, and blood dries super fast. I'm not buying any of this.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't work. This is where Making a Murderer does this really interesting move to try to explain where the blood came from. There apparently is a blood vial in a box in the county courthouse with Avery's blood in it that had been there for 10 years prior.
What?
Yeah, the reason is, okay, it's sort of like it's there because in case they needed to test the DNA against something to prove someone's guilt or innocence. Like, they literally took a blood sample from Steven Avery at some point and kept it in this box. And I'm sure they've done this with other people. And maybe they did it when they were trying to prove his innocence or something.
Blood doesn't just store and perfectly preserved in a little vial.
And we'll get to that in like 6 sentences.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. You're smart and you have a knowledge of this kind of thing, which is awesome.
I have a depth of biological knowledge.
Right, which is awesome. But when we get to it, you'll probably be like, oh yeah, okay, that's how. His defense lawyers found the vial. Okay, they went in and they had Making a Murderer there, and there was this big moment because when they open the box and they have everyone documenting it and they're cutting things open. They found the vial, and there was a little puncture, like a needle puncture at the top of the vial in that little cork. And that's it. They're like, we found it. This is how they planted evidence. That was the big moment, and I think they end an episode on that. However, what Making a Murderer fails to tell its viewers is that puncture there was put there when the blood was extracted from Steven Avery.
Right, that's like how those vials work.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know about anyone else that's listening, but I've never once had someone take blood and let it drip into an open vial.
Yeah,
exactly.
No.
That's
Right?
like not how they work.
You have to put a puncture in the top of the vial. Like it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because they're vacuum sealed. That's like how they work.
Right. So, but they leave it there with this big cliffhanger. You're like, oh fuck, that's how they did it. And after,
Ew, that's so annoying. It's like it feels like it could be like the lightest amount of forensic knowledge could take this apart.
Right? So after Making a Murderer made this big deal in this one episode, they completely forget about it in the later episodes, and the vial is never spoken of again.
How
that's
convenient.
also very interesting.
Yeah, because they knew it was bullshit. Because the defense lawyers do actually put it forward to the court. This is something Making a Murderer doesn't show you. They do put it forward, but then when the science of it comes back, they're like, okay, never mind. And they just drop that motion. But
yeah, because it's total fucking bullshit.
Right. Now, Convicting a Murderer points out that that Avery's blood in that vial had EDTA in it, which is a preservative to keep the blood from coagulating.
Okay.
And when compared to the blood in Teresa's car, the tests show that the blood in the car did not have EDTA.
Well, there you go.
There you go. But again, truthers don't give a shit about that.
Right, well, the EDTA was planted in the vial. And
I'm glad you're not on their side.
I will play devil's advocate when I do think there is reason for doubt. However,
yeah, this is not
I was going to say, when is that opportunity going to come up?
Right. So Avery's non-blood DNA was also found under the hood latch of Teresa's RAV4. So this is something Making a Murderer doesn't bring up at all.
course they don't.
So Avery clearly decided he needed to open the hood and most likely to disconnect the battery, presumably so the alarm wouldn't go off after he hid the car.
That makes sense.
Right. So at this point, like, it's there. Like, there's no, like, I don't know, like, it doesn't make sense that people won't let it go.
Yeah, it's kind of odd.
So months later, after Brandon's confession, which again we'll get to shortly, Manitowoc County officers are on the scene again, and they find a bullet in Steven Avery's garage, which had Teresa's DNA on it. As the search of the property continued, bullet casings are located in the garage, and they find bloodstains as well. At this point, nothing was removed from the garage by police. So the bloodstains were photographed and the blood was tested. While this is going on, there was a preliminary hearing to determine if Steven Avery would be brought to trial, and the court determined that there was probable cause and a trial is scheduled. That lawsuit to compensate Steven Avery for the wrongful conviction, that $36 million case, they finally dropped it, and Steven Avery settled for $400,000. The only part of that he received was $240,000 after his attorneys took their fees for representing him for that case, not even the murder trial.
Damn. So
Wow.
he's losing the rest of it
That's
for
a
representation for the murder
Big
trial.
chunk
I'm
of
sure.
change.
Exactly, and that's exactly it. They needed that money to pay his lawyers to defend Steven Avery in the murder trial. Exactly. Steven Avery then hires Dean Strang and Jerry Buting as his defense attorneys. So in December of 2005, while Avery is in jail awaiting trial, it's during this time that he is first contacted by the filmmakers of Making a Murderer. Making a Murderer is the first project these filmmakers have ever done. And them
Interesting.
which says a lot about their decision making. And them wanting to make this documentary is viewed by the Avery family as a good thing. Because obviously they're trying to prove he's innocent.
Yeah, of course it's a good thing for them. It makes sense.
So now, finally, we're going to discuss Brandon Dassey's interrogation in early 2006.
All right, let's go.
If you go and watch all of Brandon's interviews, which they are available to watch, you get a different view than the one that Making a Murderer showed you, because they only showed you one of the handful of interrogations.
And it was probably something that fit their narrative and not the whole truth.
Exactly, because he looked timid, and you can tell they were very pushy, and it looked like he was being manipulated, and he partially was. But you got to understand that this is the third or fourth interview, and they're frustrated with him, because he's already told them other information, and they're pushing him to tell them what he's already told them. Prior to that one, though, at one point, Brandon and his brother Brian were driving, and the police pulled them over. At this point in time, Teresa is still missing, so they don't have a body or bone fragments. She's just missing. And police interview Brandon, and he is not consistent with his answers. Brandon admits that he saw Teresa taking pictures at Avery's trailer, and that she had passed them on the road while they were traveling. At one point during the questioning, Brandon asked police, "Do you think he did it?" And of course, the police go, "Did what?" Because, this is how you do it, right? Brandon then asks that he raped her. So police, sitting there just looking for a missing person and kind of thinking maybe she might be murdered, are like, "Oh, a sexual assault, you say?"
Like, do tell.
Right?
That is the easiest collection of information.
Right. So they're sitting here like, what the fuck, right?
Okay, talk about murder fumbles.
Yeah,
Ding
exactly.
dong.
So, but that's kind of where that one sort of left off, because they don't really have enough to hold him or anything, and he's 16. So on November 6th, his cousin Kayla Avery is being interviewed about Steven, and she opens up questions regarding Brandon. She tells police that they should talk to him again, because she says that Brandon is often found crying and staring off into space, and she stated that he had lost somewhere around 40 pounds in the preceding months.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah, obviously something's bothering this kid. So this leads to the February 27th interview at his school. So they went to the school to sit down with him. And this is unfortunately done without the presence of his parents.
Yeah, which is bad practice.
Yes. Police were operating off the assumption that Brandon had seen Avery do something and didn't want to get his uncle in trouble. Brandon
Mm-hmm.
Brandon began telling them things that he hadn't mentioned before. He stated, quote, "I seen the fingers and the belly and the forehead in the fire," unquote.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, smoking gun.
Police called Brandon's mother at this point, and they said they would like to bring him to the station to talk to him more. Now, Brandon was interrogated again at the station, and again, he was interrogated without his mother being present. Police
Yeah, I don't love that they're doing that.
Police claim that she didn't want to be present and that Brandon said her presence wasn't necessary. But again, he's
Poor
a
kid. You
16
don't even
years
like.
old.
yeah,
You're
he's
16 years old and you don't even think you can rely on your mother for that? That
Well,
really sucks.
not only
Not
that,
even that, but you can't take a 16-year-old's judgment like that,
you
and
shouldn't. At the very least, get the kid a lawyer.
I mean,
Right.
at that age, you think you know everything and you think you can outsmart and whatever everybody else.
I don't even think Brandon was on that level because Brandon, like Steven Avery, has a low IQ and possibly even a further learning disability. Because if
All right,
you
but
watch these interviews, he's not like he's not the I hate to say it this way, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. You know, his answers are really just one word answers, which is why police get frustrated because his answers they're just not. He's not giving full sentences.
I guess I'm just kind of hooked up on the, them going through with the interrogation without
Yeah.
anybody of legal age there.
But again, I agree with you. They should have handled it better. But just
Mhm.
imagine now, it's been months and you're looking for a missing person, and now someone's telling you they saw a body in the fire.
Yeah.
So this is huge for them. So Brandon stated to police that on that day, that Halloween day, he got off his school bus at 3:45 and walked to his house and saw Teresa's vehicle. He went home and he played on the PlayStation for a couple of hours, and around 8 o'clock, he claims Steven Avery called and asked him if he wanted to go to a bonfire behind Steven's garage. Avery told him to bring a golf cart, and they used that to move larger items onto the bonfire pit. As Avery was putting these random items on, like a car seat and some wood, onto the fire, Brandon claims he saw human toes inside the pile of items.
Oh, gross and terrifying.
And he also said that as things burned, he also saw other body parts. Again, understand that police had no idea that Brandon was even possibly involved, and they were not considering that Teresa may have been cremated. So this interrogation is before they found the bone fragments.
Damn.
That same day, Avery, who was still being held pre-trial, called his mother and learned that Brandon was talking to police. He begins to get angry and annoyed and begins to tell his mother what Brandon and his mother should be doing, especially as it involves the presence of lawyers. So he at least gets that part.
Mm-hmm.
Brandon continued to speak and spoke of how Avery had helped clean up his garage. He had him help clean his garage, and that there were dark-colored substances on the floor. Brandon told police that it was blood that he had helped Avery clean up, and police conducted another interview with Brandon again on March 1st, which is the famous video on Making a Murderer. This is the one where he's sitting in like a principal's office, looking miserable, clearly not wanting to be there. And this is one of the worst ones because they're constantly like, okay, Brandon, what did you tell us before? What did you tell us before? And in an interesting twist on this, Making a Murderer, he's already told them certain things. And when they say, Brandon, didn't you say this? Or when did this happen? And Brandon's like, well, yeah, or whatever. Making a Murderer tries to pose it as that's police feeding him information. But it's already information he had given them.
Right, things he had already told them. Which is like, why are they making him say it again? That's so weird.
I don't know. That part I don't have an answer for. So again, watching this interrogation footage is a test of one's patience because he is brutally slow to answering these questions. And it is clear that at times, like I said, he's being manipulated to answer their questions the way they want him to. But you kind of understand why they're doing it. So it's frustrating. So in Making a Murderer, we are shown that Brandon told investigators that when he got off the bus from school, he walked towards his house. Now, this is a second story that he tells. He claims that at this point, There was mail for Steven Avery in his mailbox, so he was bringing it to Avery's trailer when he heard a woman screaming.
So this is a different story.
So his first story of just sitting there playing an Xbox is the lie. At this point now, he's telling them what really happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's tough to say, can you believe this one versus the first one? But when we talk about what he confesses to here, it's kind of hard to... And this is the thing, like, he does say certain things, and even in Making a Murderer, they say that he made this up or he got it out of a book or something that he read. And that may be true in a distant possibility, but I truly think the first story was to protect himself, and now, for whatever reason, he's confessing.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, he heard a woman screaming, and as he walked closer to Avery's trailer, the screams were louder. Brandon knocked at the door, and after a long period of time, Avery answered, sweaty and partially dressed. Brandon tells police this in the interview video. He said Avery invited Brandon inside and brought him to his bedroom where Teresa was shackled, naked on Steven Avery's bed.
Oh, God.
Teresa begged Brandon for her life. Avery asked him if he wanted some pussy.
Fucked up and disgusting.
Brandon admits to having sex with Teresa, and of course, Making a Murderer does not include that part.
Yeah, of course.
Brandon tells police that Avery stood at the door the entire time and told him he did a good job.
Ew.
What?
When Brandon was asked why he participated in the rape of Teresa, he said that he wanted to know what sex felt like.
Disgusting.
Wow.
Brandon was then charged with the rape of Teresa Halbach. Now, even with the pressure police were putting on him, there is no reason to believe he wasn't telling the truth here. It's very likely that Brandon was pushed by Avery into assaulting Teresa, and I'm not saying it absolves him of what he did, but I think if it wasn't for Steven Avery, Brandon would never have been a threat to society.
Absolutely not.
I think someone that literally all they need to become a rapist is to be presented with someone to rape.
You know, okay.
I do not think that is a, like, inherently good person.
Agreed. I'm saying he's still a piece of shit and a scumbag for everything he did, but I don't think he would have ever raped somebody under any other circumstances.
I don't know. There's lots of vulnerable positions a woman can be put into.
True. You're right. You know what? He hadn't reached college yet. He hadn't been shown like date rape drugs or unconscious women. I agree. So maybe he would have. But I certainly...
Right, and maybe that tendency is because he was growing up in the vicinity and under the influence of this man. Sure, yes.
Right.
But...
Especially because we're talking about a man who had his own 15-year-old brother sleep with his first wife while he listened on the phone. Yeah. So I don't know. Again, Brandon is where, like, this whole thing, like, he played a role and he paid the price. You know, so I'm not saying this kid is innocent in any way, but I don't think he's intelligent enough though to do it. I'm not defending him by any means.
Intelligent enough to do what? Be a rapist?
Yes.
That's not a thing.
Yeah, that's not a thing, man. Dumb people, like literally forcing someone to have sex with you has nothing to do with intelligence at all. That's intent and that's power. Yeah. I'm glad we came up with that word at the same time. Okay, continuing on. Brandon told police that Avery told him to cut Teresa's throat and that he stabbed her in the stomach.
Brandon stabbed her in the stomach?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Brandon spoke of a lot of blood being spilled, but the photos of the crime scene, in particular the mattress, showed zero blood, which Making a Murderer and truthers used to dispute Brandon's claim. Now, experts have stated that a lack of blood does not mean that a murder didn't take place.
Right. It does definitely sus that there's no blood on the bed.
Well, it's funny. I'm about to go into that. So based on what he said, the blood wouldn't have been cast off. There's no like stabbing motion. You know, he's not pulling his hand back in a grand gesture to spray blood anywhere. And that if it pooled, especially if Avery, who was planning this, had plastic underneath her, it would have been easily
like any
cleaned.
half-decent murderer.
Correct. It would have been easily cleaned up. So that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
That's true.
Convicting a Murderer plays recordings of phone conversations with Steven Avery and other family members regarding Brandon confessing to police. And it's so obvious that Avery is angry and trying to manipulate people. He even speaks to the Making a Murderer filmmakers, and they assure him that they have not changed their opinions of him or the direction of their film. So, more than anything else, that proves that they had blinders on and they had intent, that they were going to try to portray him as innocent. And they did. So Brandon also gave information regarding shooting of guns in the garage. So police went and searched, and that's when they found the bullet fragments. One of the bullets was destroyed, but the other was not, and when tested, the DNA on it matched Teresa. Making a Murderer fails to report that the bullet was fired from Avery's gun that was in his home, hanging over his bed.
Ew. Why would you hang a gun over your bed? Sorry, this is total unrelated, but that's some weird fucking decor, bro.
Well, I mean, do you remember Catherine Knight had those fucking blades hanging over her bed?
Blades are cool, but also that's my personal bias. I don't think guns are that cool.
I personally, I do love guns, and I can see hanging.
There are people. These are my blinders showing. I'm like, like a sword. That's fucking sick. But a gun, ew.
Well, I just imagine more like I think hunters will hang guns on their shelves. Hanging it over your bed is a little weird.
Yes, that's yeah. It's not a really sexy vibe that you got.
No, not at all. And in fact, would make me very nervous if I were in a vulnerable position on someone's bed. Yeah. So Brandon even told police that he and Avery used gasoline, paint thinner, and bleach to try to clean up the blood that was in the garage.
Oh, God.
Dang.
Police would only get minor hits for fluid in the area, but most of their testing was inconclusive as a result, which makes sense.
Yep.
Brandon even turned over to police the pants he was wearing that night that he had already cleaned, but those pants had bleach stains on them, which kind of confirms his story that he's standing there pouring bleach on the ground.
Yeah. Have we talked about yet what is his motivation for confessing all of this?
I think he just got worn down. Because, think about it. He's losing weight. He's crying all the time. I think he
feels guilty about this crime.
Exactly. He was exhausted, and he just got worn down and got it off his chest. They're really, other than, possible police manipulation, which is what people who think he's innocent, Steven Avery is innocent, claim, there's no other real reason. He's exhausted. And in a lot of ways, I can't.
And also, two things can be true, right?
That's true.
He can be exhausted, and it can also be police manipulation. It can be police manipulation, and he's still the murderer. Any grouping of these things can be true or
That's
not
true. You're 100% right. We kind of forget that because this isn't a movie where everything has to be one or the other. Yeah.
Exactly. There's nuance.
So Brandon also spoke of how they put Teresa in the back of her RV, her RAV4, and that Avery initially intended to dump her in the pond at the quarry. Now, there are bloodstains in the hatch of Teresa's vehicle that match the pattern of wet hair. And Avery later changed his mind and decided to burn her, according to Brandon. So on that same day that Brandon confesses, police held a press conference to announce that they had arrested Brandon Dassey, who was only 16, in connection with Teresa's murder. Ken Kratz, the special prosecutor, told the public that what he was about to tell them was brutal and graphic, and then on live TV reported the worst of the details of what happened.
Why would you do that?
I don't know.
That seems incredibly unprofessional and incredibly damning and just a stupid move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He later apologized for doing it that way. Not that solves anything.
You should lose your job and just be shunned.
Doesn't make their case look good either.
No, not at all.
That's what I'm saying is why shoot yourself in the foot like that?
I don't think people like that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's pretty stupid on their part.
Usually you want to keep that stuff quiet so that you can use it in trial.
Exactly.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't look like you're trying to rile up the public to make an angry mob.
Exactly. Fucking up the jury pool,
Mm-hmm.
So after Brandon confessed to police, the Innocence Project, that had helped exonerate Steven Avery before and had his photo on their website removed it after he was charged with the murder.
Dang. They were like, we don't want you to be our poster boy anymore.
Exactly. And after Brandon's confession and he was incarcerated, Brandon called his mother. He had a super awkward conversation with her where he's trying to explain what happened with police and what he told them. And after he finished talking, his mother, Barbara, asked, "So Steven did do it?" And Brandon said, "Yeah." Brandon admits to doing some of the things that he said in his statement. So at this point, I'm guessing he doesn't want to fully confess to his own mother.
Right.
Right? So his mother asks why he didn't say anything, because they could have called 911 and maybe Teresa wouldn't have been killed. And Brandon told her that he didn't tell her because he believed he would have gone to jail just for knowing about it. And Barb told him that had he reported it, he would have been a hero. Which,
yep.
100% true.
100% true.
Brandon was offered a lesser sentence if he would testify against Steven Avery. But the Avery family convinced him not to say anything.
On trial?
Correct. Like, they told him not to say anything about Steven Avery at that point, to leave it alone, don't take a lesser sentence, don't take their plea deals, that sort of thing. It's pretty clear that Avery was all over his family to shut Brandon up based on the phone recordings. Brandon's lawyer was dismissed by the family, but who exactly made that decision is generally unclear. Now, I don't go too much into this, but Brandon had a lawyer that, for whatever reason, brought Brandon out to sit down with a private investigator to discuss the crime again. And that actually made Brandon look even worse. It doesn't make sense why they did that at all.
Yeah.
But
there's a lot of people doing a bad job here.
Yeah, it's fucked up. So Brandon went to trial, and the pressure to not testify against Avery by the Avery family led Brandon down a road to ruin. It's fairly obvious that they sacrificed Brandon in order to try to save Steven.
Which is fucked up.
Yeah. The worst part is that when they put Steven Avery on trial, Brandon's trial and all the information that were in his were not allowed in as evidence in Steven's trial.
Whoa.
Really?
Yeah, it's really fucked up. They didn't talk about whatever Brandon said in his confession. Most of that was not used in Steven Avery's trial.
That's fucking crazy.
They kept them very much separated. Part of the reason they didn't allow it in there is because a lot of what Brandon had confessed to didn't fit the narrative that they were going for in Steven's defense. Brandon over here saying they had her tied to a bed and they were raping her doesn't exactly help. You know what I mean?
No, it doesn't. And that makes, because they want to frame it on hard evidence.
Correct.
Not just a confession that can be kind of loose.
Right. So one other thing that supporters of Steven Avery will argue was the supposed DNA evidence mix-up that came out during his trial. There's a woman named Sherry Culhane, and she was the person processing the DNA. She accidentally got her own DNA mixed into a control sample.
What?
Yeah. So obviously the defense tries to use this to Steven's advantage. So to be clear, the actual DNA sample was not contaminated. The contamination...
The control sample was.
The negative control sample was. Exactly. Now, this is what truthers will cling to, which many admit they don't know or care how it works. They're just like, oh, nope, DNA was tampered, blah, blah, blah. Right? Fucking idiots. So regardless, Sherry had to file a deviation of protocol due to this mistake. And the deviation was so that the evidence wouldn't get thrown out because the DNA sample was so small, it couldn't be tested a second time. So it was necessary to file the deviation so that, again, they could keep the evidence. And of course, making a murderer makes a mountain out of a molehill with this one. Yeah.
Right, because I have to do deviations a lot for work because I work in, testing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you have to really go through a lot of detail and a lot of analysis and look into every possible option why this could have happened. And it's like I can see there being stuff there for them to grasp at when they're not really understanding what's going on.
Right. That's interesting. I just assumed it was just like a little piece of paperwork you had to sign and put on top, and then you just move forward.
Depends, but
Right.
usually mine are like 10 pages long.
Okay, well, shit. Remind me to, if I ever need DNA help, I'm calling you.
Yeah.
Let's hope
Call
that,
your local chemistry major.
right?
To be altered in your favor?
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Actually, no, you're right. That would keep her from being any part of a trial I might be in.
Yeah, true.
So, Making a Murderer also really pushed to make Sergeant Colburn a villain in this case. Now, he's the one who moved the stand that dropped the key. He's the one who, we're going to talk about he's the one who called in about Teresa's car, which we're about to discuss. But he's one of those names that kept coming up that they tried to villainize.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons the hate towards him that was so great was because of a dispatch call he made where he asked about Teresa Hallback's license plate number. Colburn was driving when the call came in to be on the lookout for a green RAV4, and that included the license plate. Now, he was driving, so he grabbed something and he tried to write the license plate number down as he was moving. So he had called the dispatcher back to verify that he had written it down correctly. Now, Making a Murderer presents this as if Colburn had found the vehicle before it was officially found by Pam Sturm, Teresa's cousin, and that he was reading the license plate off the vehicle itself.
That doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah, but you should, if you watch this section in Making a Murderer, they really do a fucked up job trying to make him look bad.
I'm sure they can tell a very convincing story if they've convinced all these people.
It's crazy. And they even talked about, Convicting a Murderer talks about how when they ask Colburn a question, they actually edit in a different part where he's responding. So like they take it from a different part of his testimony. So like he's like looking sad, or maybe he's pausing or sighing in a certain way. They purposefully edited that to make him look worse.
That's so fucked up.
Yeah. So when asked on the stand about this call, Colburn couldn't remember exactly what had happened, those details, because it had been a year before.
Right, and that's like not something you're even thinking about.
Right, and Avery's defense, of course, argued that meant he must be lying.
Of course they conclude that.
Ridiculous. So in the end, Steven Avery was convicted to life in prison on June 1st, 2007. Brandon Dassey was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 41 years on August 2nd, 2007. After Making a Murderer became so big, the defense team for Steven Avery went on a tour charging money for tickets and sat there and spoke to crowds of people about the case.
Damn. Okay, so now they're making money off of it.
Yep. The filmmakers for Making a Murderer also offer public speaking events and charge between $20,000 and $30,000 per engagement.
What the holy hell?
Like, that in itself is not suspicious. They're filmmakers.
Yep.
But...
And I do want to point out that other than a second season of Making a Murderer, they haven't done much else.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, they're probably trying to just live off that alone.
They might be able to at this point.
Or waiting for the next case that they think they can bust open like that.
As the result of Making a Murderer essentially demonizing Sergeant Colburn, he has received harassment and death threats to him and his family.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. That's fucked up.
He has literally received calls at his private home where people are telling him to kill himself, wishing his mother would be raped and shit like that from all over the world.
Holy crap.
Oh, I hate people.
Yep. Now, just last week, former Manitowoc County Sheriff's Officer Lieutenant Dave Remaker was charged for misconduct in the office after an internal audit found several $1,000s of asset forfeiture funds were not put in the designated accounts. Now, forfeiture funds are proceeds that are seized, they're seized assets from criminal investigations that are then later used to pay for law enforcement programs. So as a result of this, Avery's lawyer is now trying to claim that the integrity of Steven Avery's entire trial and conviction should be called into question.
That's a bit of a stretch.
It is, and they have tried so many things to get his case brought back into court. It's ridiculous.
I'm sure they have.
So the phenomenon of Steven Avery cannot be overstated. He has had numerous girlfriends and fiancées since being in prison.
What the fuck? Hey, what the fuck?
It's all that fame.
I told you
Girls,
I told you in episode 1 you'd be pissed at the end.
Girls, please.
However, some of these women have released letters to the public that he has sent them where he threatens them.
God fucking damn it, you of course.
Now, he has stated that if they betray him or speak about these letters, he will publicly call them out as being on drugs and that their kids are on drugs. He even wrote to one woman, and this is fucking disgusting, and I can't believe I have to say these words. But he even wrote to one woman, quote, "Do you want me to come in a bag? Let me know. Taste me and put me in you," unquote.
Oh. Oh. No.
What the fuck?
No.
What the absolute fuck?
No, he deserves prison for just saying that.
I can't believe I just had to say it out loud.
And you did, and I can't believe I had to hear you say that out loud.
Oh,
the things we do for journalism.
I think that one of the craziest theories truthers put out there might be one of the worst theories I've heard. In this theory, Teresa's not even dead, and is in on the Avery framing and living in another country.
The fuck?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be really twisted if that was true.
It'd be really fucked up, but really? So, FBI used mitochondrial DNA testing to conclude that the remains were in fact Teresa Halbach. Yet all these years later, the idea that she is still alive persists for some people. And of course, Making a Murderer did not include the FBI's findings on that in their film.
It's a broken record at this point. All the things
right?
they didn't include
Exactly.
on purpose.
Convicting a Murderer met with many truthers throughout the making of their response video, their series, and while not all of them were swayed, the ones that are intelligent enough and open-minded enough to concede that maybe they were wrong started to dig deeper. Realistically, they feel as I do now, which is that all the evidence simply points to Steven Avery having killed Teresa Halbach. If you are even remotely critical of media, you have to ask yourself, how did two different juries in two different cases come to a guilty verdict if the information that you had while watching Making a Murderer was all the information there was? The answer, the answer is quite simple. They had more information than Making a Murderer gave their audience.
Exactly. And it's a testament to how persuasive media can be.
Exactly. Like, this is probably one of the worst examples of it that I've ever seen.
Yeah, and like one with consequences.
Big consequences, yeah. Now, Brandon Dassey has exhausted all of his appeals at this point, and Steven Avery continues to try to appeal and enter new evidence as he and his lawyers attempt to put forth other suspects. One such suspect his lawyers have tried to put forward is his other nephew, Bobby Dassey, Brandon's brother.
Oh, he's just going to throw everybody underneath the bus, isn't he?
Oh, it's brutal.
Can't believe anyone in his family is still trying to help him. That's pretty whack.
It's crazy.
They're pretty whack people for that.
And so far, none of that has worked, and only people that have watched Making a Murderer and did zero all-outs in terms of digging into it continue to support him. And that is finally the ending of our three-part case on Steven Avery.
Can you just imagine being part of the judicial system and like his appeals come across your desk?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because when I was looking up any like updated information, as I said, literally just last week, that one officer was accused of crimes. The prosecutors in this case literally said, like, his current lawyer is like, he goes, if you ever hear me say something bad and they don't include me saying she's full of shit, you only heard half the story.
Damn.
It's pretty funny, but it's true. Like, people need to just stop trying to support this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I think it's just like an interesting cult psychology thing of people just
That's true.
Why are they so invested in this?
Because somehow Making a Murderer did it in such a way that it pulled on your heartstrings just enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
you just have to cast shadow of doubt on one person, and then that everything just spirals.
But I said this in the first episode, pretty much at the beginning. There are a lot of wrongfully convicted people in this country. Why is this one redneck white guy more important than everybody else?
Yeah, true. Why do we care about this one so much? And this one, like, there are, like, actual, like, obviously wrongly convicted people. Truly, why did they make the movie about, or what, the series about this guy, and why him?
Yeah, why him? And I think it's because he was wrongfully convicted of the sexual assault on Penny Bernstein, and then he's very quickly accused of murder, so it creates its own, like, suspense and intrigue.
True.
And
True.
that more than the rest of it is really what holds it together and why it becomes so compelling. And the whole thing is just crazy. And after researching it the way I have zero doubt Steven Avery's guilty. Zero doubt. And I think you guys agree based on what I presented to you. And all our listeners, I encourage you to dig deeper, because I guarantee you'll feel the same way I do.
Yeah, I definitely, after hearing this from you, I definitely do want to watch both shows and see.
It's so good.
Because obviously, you telling the story, having seen them both, is still just another person telling a story.
Right.
At the end of the day.
That's true. And to be honest, we did this in roughly 3 hours. Making a Murderer, the first season is 10 episodes. The second season is like another 10 episodes, I think. Doesn't accomplish as much, so I don't necessarily recommend it, but you can watch it. And then Convicting a Murderer, I think, is 8 or 10 episodes. So we're talking at least 20 to 30 hours worth of material that I crammed into 3.
Mm-hmm.
And mainly because there was a lot of stuff I couldn't possibly go into. It wasn't as important, but they'll go into it.
Without this becoming the making / Convicting a Murderer podcast.
Which is really funny, because I'm currently researching another case that I want to cover. And I discovered an 8-episode podcast about the case, and no one has done that much research everywhere else I've looked. So I'm currently listening to that to see what insights they may have.
That's got to be insane. They must uncover every little pebble.
Well, so far, I'm only on episode 2, but so far, the reason it's so long is because it's almost like you're listening to a novel. They go on about details that don't really matter.
They're telling a story.
Yeah, it's like, and on the snow frosted ground, and it's like, okay, we don't need all this. Like,
get to the facts.
Exactly. So I think that's why it's going to be 8 parts. But I'm committed. I really want to do my due diligence. I need to hear every point of view. So, but yes, thank you everyone for joining us. Now next week, Jameson, do you think you'll have your case ready next week?
I'm planning on it.
All right, so next week, Jameson will tell us a case. If not, I'll do another one, and we'll get his 2 weeks from now.
Jameson, if this case is another unsolved one, we're gonna fight you.
I would pay to see that. We should put you guys on the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson. Or no,
oh, Lord.
Wait, did I say that Jake Paul? No, that was. Is that right, Jake Paul?
I don't know. I'm not that kind of person.
But it'd be funny. We'll get you guys on a pay-per-view event.
Okay, sick. Put us on AEW.
Nice. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again. I am Janice Dead.
I'm Jameson Dead.
And I'm Joyous Dead.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye.